Hi everyone, welcome back to the Final Points YouTube channel. Know you've been waiting for us to pop up in your subscription feed, and we're back just in time for the big game. I'm joined by Brian Coyle and Andrew Park to discuss who's going to win this one. Is it going to be the #1 offense in the Denver Broncos or the #1 defense in the Seattle Seahawks? From Media Day, here's Brian Coyle.
Well, Chough, as you mentioned, #1 offense versus #1 defense, but that won't be what decides this game. It will be the offense of the Seattle Seahawks and the defense of the Denver Broncos. If the Seahawks are going to win this game, Russell Wilson has to have a good game. Because even though Peyton Manning throws ducks, like he said, he throws ducks for touchdowns. And this Seattle defense won't be able to get away with as much pressure as they usually do, given the fact the officials will call this game tight and down the line because it's the Super Bowl. And it's just going to be an interesting thing because will Russell Wilson live up to the billing? This is his first major game where he can have a big impact. He didn't have that. He's made a couple clutch throws, but he hasn't put together a complete game yet. If he puts together a complete game, Seattle is the favorite here. If not, the Broncos' high-powered offense against Seattle's defense, and I think the offense eventually wins out in that matchup.
Right, and Las Vegas seems to agree with you, putting the Broncos as the clear favorites in this Sunday's matchup. Now we'll go to our completely unbiased NFL analyst, Andrew Park.
Well, I wouldn't be a very good Broncos fan if I didn't think that they could win on Sunday, tomorrow. But just like Brian said, I mean, if you've been watching any of the First Take, I believe Antonio Cromartie, Jets cornerback, said it the best. The Broncos have just too many weapons. The four horsemen, I'm going to name Julius Thomas, Demaryius Thomas, Wes Welker, Eric Decker, and not to mention Knowshon Moreno coming out of the backfield. They each have 10 or more touchdowns, which is the first time any offense has ever done that. So I really think that the Broncos eventually will be able to crack through the defense. I mean, yes, the Legion of Boom, quote unquote, has been really great this season, and they might be one of the history's best secondaries ever put together. But at the same time, you only have so many DBs. How many DBs do you think you need to cover the Denver Broncos? And I'm not even mentioning Monty Ball, who has been actually yards per carry basis has been better than Knowshon Moreno, and he can come out of the backfield as well. So, just like Brian said, I think it comes down to whether or not Russell Wilson and that his wide receiver core can really break through to the Broncos defense, who have been playing actually stellar defense in the past 2 games in the playoffs, only giving up around 16 points per game.
Yeah, when you got a guy like Pot Roast in the middle, it's pretty easy, right?
Yeah, and Champ Bailey is back and starting, and can't forget about Run DRC, Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie, who's been playing a hell of a job at the #1 corner spot for the entire season. So I think it will be a pretty good matchup. I mean, you got the best defense against the best offense. You have 2 very similar head coaches in the article which I wrote earlier this week.
Which you can find on finalpoints.com.
Oh, yes.
Shameless plug.
But I think it's really going to come down to just, can the Broncos defense stop Seattle's big play tendencies? In the NFC Championship game, the Seahawks, you saw they scored on really long plays, like the 51-yard pass to Doug Baldwin, like the 40-yard run by Marshawn Lynch. So
yeah, you make a great point, Andrew, because those were just quick hitters. Like, they just happened out of nowhere. And that they have to put together a complete game. And as you mentioned before, Seattle's secondary is going to have to cover all of those weapons mano-a-mano. They can't just hide it with a zone because of the fact that all these guys are so good. And Chough, of course, your favorite player in this entire matchup is Russell Wilson, given the gigantic man crush that you have. Do you think you will on this guy since coming out of college? You just love this guy, and this is the first time that he's got to come through in the clutch for them to win, because they can't get away with just playing good defense. Do you think he responds to the challenge here?
You hit it exactly on the nose, Brian. Russell Wilson has this entire pressure on him to live up to, considering the fact that everyone's going to be keying in on Marshawn Lynch. And if you take away him, you're going to be relying on Russell Wilson. Now, what I will say is he was able to perform pretty darn well against the San Francisco 49ers, considering their defense is pretty darn good. And I don't know about you, Andrew, but I would not be quick to try and compare the San Francisco 49ers defense with the Broncos defense, especially as it is now without Von Miller, who they've actually been undefeated without his play.
And you've got to also, before you say anything else, remember, Wilson played at home. throughout the entire playoffs. That means a lot when you have everybody quieted down and the offense can go to work. In New Jersey, because they've posted this thing as the New York City Super Bowl, but obviously we all know it's East Rutherford, New Jersey, in the swamps, and it's going to be ugly. But won't be a hostile environment, because walking around the city yesterday for Super Bowl Media Week, there's a lot more Seahawks fans than Broncos fans, but it will be something to watch, given the fact that this is the first time away from home.
Right, but at the same time, the Seattle Seahawks had one of the best road records in the NFL as well. It's not like he's a complete scrub. I really do believe in his clutch factor. I've been following Russell Wilson since his NC State days, and one of the most impressive performances I saw from him was in the Rose Bowl against a heavily favored Oregon. Now, for those of us who follow college football regularly, we all know that the Rose Bowl is maybe the biggest stage you can get in college football, maybe even bigger than the national championship, just because of the prestige and the legacy that it has. And he was able to bring his game up to that, and even though he was a huge underdog, he was within one Hail Mary pass of winning that game. On the other hand, this Seattle Seahawks offense doesn't really have that weapon that causes defensive coordinators to stay up at night. You have Golden Tate, you have Doug Baldwin. It's not really anyone who's going to scare you, except they finally have Percy Harvin back.
But you don't know what you're going to get out of him, given the fact he's played how many snaps this year.
This is going to be his third game that he suited up for. Never mind that the second game that he suited up for was against the New Orleans Saints, which he only registered about 15 snaps before getting carted off with a concussion. How he'll be able to affect this game, we don't know yet. But I do believe in his leadership. I do believe that this game will inevitably come down to not the number one offense versus the number one defense, but rather Seattle's offense versus the Denver Broncos defense. While the Denver Broncos defense is relatively unhealthy, missing the likes of Chris Harris, their number one cornerback, Derek Wolfe, their versatile defensive tackle, and others, going so far down to having to play the defensive tackle who used to play for Jacksonville for 12 snaps in the AFC Championship game.
Jeremy Mincey.
Exactly, Jeremy Mincey. Now they have to take that against a very healthy Seattle Seahawks offense. I don't know how that's going to play out, per se, but I do know, in my mind, Seattle has the advantage in that one.
Well, it really depends how you look at it. I'm sure everyone here has watched the Denver Broncos games like I have, but Broncos have stopped the run as well as anybody has. I mean, Brian mentioned Pot Roast, a.k.a. Terrence Knighton, who has been plugging up the middle really, really well, and I think also who's been people who have been really contributing has been rookie Sylvester Williams out of UNC Chapel Hill, also Malik Jackson, who is a fifth-round draft pick and who has been contributing really, really well. So I think that the key to this is, can the Broncos stop Marshawn Lynch? And if they can bottom him up, and if they can limit his yards per carry and limit the big plays that he's known for, then I think that they can force Russell Wilson to pass, and in the end, they can put themselves in a really good situation, because their pass rush has also been really good as well, as I believe they sacked Tom Brady 4 times a couple weeks ago in the AFC Championship game.
All right, so Andrew, I'm going to ask you the big question. Who wins, by how much, and why?
I think my answer is obvious. Denver Broncos will win. If you guys remember last year, I predicted I came closest to predicting the final score between the Niners and the Ravens. I said 35-31, and then it ended up being 34-31 or something. So I think that if the Broncos score above 26 points, they'll win. And I think they can do that, despite how good Seattle's defense is. I think that the defense is a little bit overhyped, despite them being so good and deserving all the hype. And I think that the score in the end will be 31-23 Broncos.
Okay, and Brian, your take.
It's gonna be close, man. This is the closest matchup that we've had in a long time, and something is just telling me that Seattle is gonna win this. I don't know why. It's not. Wilson's got to come up big, and just for some reason, I'm just feeling that defense, and Wilson makes a couple key plays down the stretch. Peyton's gonna have a great game, but I just see Seattle coming up on top, probably 27-24.
Okay, And as for my pick, I'll preface this with this. I agree with all the points made so far. I think this is going to be one of the classic Super Bowls. I think it's going to be perfect for everything that's involved, especially having it outdoors in a quote-unquote cold weather environment, despite it being around the mid-40s.
A balmy mid-40s for this time of year around here.
Yeah, especially for New Jersey. Now, for me, I believe, in the words of the boss, I think the Seattle Seahawks were born to run, and I think they're going to take this one. But I think it'll come down to the last drive. I really do. I really believe it's going to come down to Peyton Manning with the ball in the last drive, and it's going to depend on what he does. I think it's going to be that close, but I think it's going to be Seattle 24, Denver 20. But I will be rooting for the Broncos. And so that's it for our Super Bowl debate. I'm David Chough. You can find all of us on Twitter on the screen below in the lower third. If you want to read more of our Super Bowl coverage, go to www.thefinalpoints.com. Follow us on Twitter @thefinalpoints. And until next time, stay tuned.